Hello, everyone. This is Sherilyn Moore with Building Hope, and we're here with a group of amazing charter school leaders to talk about community engagement at the first annual Building Hope Impact Summit and Awards. Welcome, everybody. So today we're going to not focus, but we'll start with talking about community engagement and probably unearth a few other topics that we want to talk about after that. But I think I'm going to start with common ground, not so common ground. Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys are engaged in community and just inside your own community, your own school community, as well as the external folks around there?
Sure. So Common Ground has been around for a long time. We've been around for 25 years. It's one of the oldest charter schools in the state of Connecticut. So we say that because we've had a long time to work on this. It was founded by community members who wanted to provide more opportunities for environmental learning and leadership for young people in New Haven. And so it started as a nonprofit, and they decided that a charter school was the best way to serve our community. So we founded a charter school in 1997. And we work with the community in lots of ways. So our students complete portfolios of leadership to graduate for their senior defense project, all of which are work, they have to partner with a community organization. So for example, two of our students right now are working with our board of alders and the public works department to try to have sidewalks and speed bumps and things built on the street outside of our school, which is not the safest because of lots of traffic. So our students do that kind of work. And then we have a lot of other things going on our campus in addition to our high school. Summer camp, field trips, after school programs, and then work that and our students can work in those programs as well as, after school and then vacations. And then we also do something called the Schoolyards program, where our environmental educators and students go out into the community and partner with other K-8 schools in the city of New Haven to build school gardens, pollinator habitats, and then create like maker spaces and teach kids and teachers how to do outdoor learning and environmental learning on their own campuses. So just the mission being not that environmental learning doesn't just happen on common ground because we're in a forest. It can happen in your own little corner of New Haven as well.
So I'm fascinated by this piece right now because, and I'm going to say it back to you just to make sure everybody's clear. Your charter school sends your people to all of the other schools, whether they're charter schools or regular public schools. Why do you do that?
So at least I'm not familiar with all of the charter environment across the country, but in Connecticut we talk about how charter law got passed in the first place was with the idea that charter schools are centers of innovation. Charter schools with more agency, more autonomy, perhaps smaller scale, can really be more nimble and creative in their programming. But the idea was that if we do that at the charter schools, one, it benefits our communities because charter school students are our students, right? Charter school students are New Haven kids, just like New Haven public school students are New Haven kids. But the practices, ideally, the practices that we develop in charter schools should be practices that bring benefit to the community more broadly. And Common Ground took that really seriously. In fact, it is one of the things we have to report on every year, and whenever we do charter renewal, is how is what we do in our school benefiting the broader community. And we have long-standing partnerships with schools in New Haven, other community organizations to do that work.
So sometimes the idea of school is in a small building and only serving the people that go to that school, right? So why would we want to go out in the community? What is that benefit for reaching out? What do you think?
I think for Legends Academy, we have to reach out to the community. It is part of the reason why we started. We also started from a community group, stakeholders coming together saying, we want a school in our neighborhood, with court-ordered desegregation. The children in the neighborhood got bused to about 5 or 6 different elementary schools. So the only way to bring a school back into the neighborhood was for it to be a charter school. And that was about 20 years ago. And so, and you all know so that's one of the reasons. And the other is, we get in Florida about 70 cents to the dollar of a traditional public school. And so it's really important that we go out and we reach out to our community for resources that we need in order to really provide our children with the best educational experience possible.
That's awesome. I'm curious about, in your program too, Alexis, the real benefits that the students are getting and how are they empowered to choose, and what do you guys provide with, because I know you have a lot of partnerships with a lot of different nonprofit organizations. And I'm very curious about that. So will you share a little bit about that with us?
Absolutely. So I think there's tremendous benefit to the students. For students, our students are advocates, they're leaders, they're change makers. And so I think opportunities to work in real life settings where they have to navigate real life prepares them for high school, for college, and for the career of their choice. So we find that as our kids go to high school, they always come back to us and they say, the opportunities that you gave me to advocate for myself or to volunteer or to work with elected officials to pass this bill or to work in the nursing home or to work in any of the myriad of organizations that our students work in, those are the moments that they remember because they're kind of asked to advocate for themselves and to use their voice for change. But I also think that it benefits the community organizations in meaningful ways. One, because community organizations are always looking for youth voices. Our youth are our future. And so when we work with Save Our Streets, Crown Heights on our annual walkout to end gun violence, there's lots of adults advocating for gun laws and against gun violence. But to have 300 middle school students walking through the neighborhood demanding change is extremely powerful. With the Campaign Against Hunger, who's fighting for food justice, when we work with this organization, there's lots of adults and corporations that are volunteering on their farms and in their pantries. But when we bring all of our students, I think there's a renewed sense of life and energy that our students bring to the table, and it changes people's perspective on what's possible, what our kids can do. And in doing that, I think that they start to invite more youth into the conversation in other ways.
Do you guys think that the youth now, maybe Sky, you want to start us off on this one? It seems to me, I've got this impression that they seem to be more engaged. They seem to be more wanting to reach out and solve problems for their communities and their in our world. Do you find that with your generation? Do you find that that's, you wouldn't know more than the other ones, but is that something that's, you think, endemic to your generation?
I definitely think it's a generational thing, even more as I notice, even with just being on social media, you can hear a lot of youth's opinions and their voices. Like I said, if there isn't a platform given to them, they're going to find a way regardless, even if it's just spreading infographics, creating our own events to spread awareness. Either way, we're going to make sure that our opinions and our voices are heard. I currently serve as a student representative on the DC State Board of Education, and so we've had simultaneous ways to find new ways to invent for us youth to be able to speak upon new things that we haven't yet discovered before. And so one of the examples is with being on the State Board of Education, we have committees, the adults do. And for example, there's an advocacy and outreach committee, but these were only available to the adults. So during our public meeting one time, all of us student representatives, we raised our hand and we said, well, what is the possibility of youth serving on these committees? Because I think we have some new advice and some new input that we can give. And also, I think that we can understand what youth need more because we are members of the youths ourselves. And so then we were able to be a part of the committees and we were able to attend those meetings and share and highlight our voices. And it began a change. It started a new movement. And I think opportunities like this and opportunities where youth can shine the importance of what we want to see and what we would like to see and elevating a platform for us to share our input is what matters most.
Sky brought up bringing student voice because that's an integral part of a school community, right? How do we do that? How do we invite them in?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. We have a few different ways that we really involve our families and our board members as well. One of them related to the burning book idea is we have something called the Diversity and Racial Equity Committee. Actually, we've turned it to CREW, and it is half family members and half staff that are part of this CREW that meet right now every other week. And it's evolved across time. We started it maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it has changed purposes, but it has been a way for us to really think about how truly inclusive are we being in our school. And we've made sure across time that we have some sort of board representation. Our family association is somehow represented, so that all of the stakeholders that are really making those changes are part of it. The piece that's missing is the student piece, and we're talking about that, of how to add students into it. But it's been a great platform for us to be able to really look at it deeply at our curriculum and trying to figure out like what more can we do to make sure that it's truly inclusive and equitable and culturally responsive. We also this year started affinity groups with our families. So we have a group of families that their children are students with special needs and neurodiversity is big. So they have come together. It was started with our director of family and community engagement, but she pulls herself out of it so that families just have this space to just talk and share with resources and just share whatever's going on in their minds, and it just gives them that kind of platform. And then we have a racial equity, we have families who are families of color that have come together as an affinity group as well, just to speak about their experience at our school and making sure that they also have a place and space to talk. So it's an up and coming kind of initiative that we're working on with these affinity groups.
That's great.
I was just going to say, in the state of Florida, we have, Jennifer and I are both in the state of Florida, we have actually a lot of external pressures that I'm afraid may change our engagement with families in the community, and that's around security. So in the state of Florida, every public and charter school has to have an armed security officer at all times on campus when students are there. So we have an armed security officer, fully armed, from 7:30 in the morning till 5:30 p.m. We also, Jennifer and I, and then I'm sure you'll jump in, have to fill out every year an 83-page state form about our security on campus. And it has to be done with our local law enforcement and fire department. And it goes to the district and the state. Everything's about security, and I'm fearful that we're gonna lose the engagement piece on campus because everything's about how do people access your doors, and do you have appointments, and are you checking them, and you have one single point of entry, and there's all these security that as leaders you're terrified that you're going to do the wrong thing because you want to do the right thing for families, and God forbid something happens, and then your hand is slapped and you're all over the front page of the news. So it's really a balance right now that I'm struggling with, and how to engage our families, because to me, in my experience through COVID, especially our families who are struggling with so many aspects of autism and family life, on campus is so much more powerful. But we are having to think a little bit more creative. So for now, we're continuing the Google Meets or the Zoom, whatever's available. And families are engaging in that. But I'm really worried we're not gonna see the body language, the facial cues of those families and be able to pull them aside and say, what's really going on? I see your shoulders are down. You look really tired. Tell me. You don't see that in Zoom. Mm-hmm. So I'm worried about the safety and security of our families, the mental health of our families, because we can't see them. And so eventually, because we're rebels, we're gonna do what we wanna do, because we need our families to be safe and happy, and we really have an obligation to make sure that they are okay, and refer them to services if they're not, or resources. So in Florida, we're really struggling with this balance of security, and keep your campus locked down and don't let anybody in. It's a strange scenario right now.
It's challenging.
Yeah.
When I was in California and I got a teaching job tutoring, and they gave me the instructions, and I'm driving my little car and I'm missing it. I'm like, I keep missing it. I said, all I see is a prison. I'm like, no. I'm like, they're like, that's the school. I'm like, what do you mean? I said, no, there's barbed wire, there's things, I don't even know how to get in. I'm like, that is a prison. I've seen prisons, that's a prison. And they're like, no, and you were supposed to be there 15 minutes ago. Oh no, right? It was a school.
Yeah.
And it was in Compton, And I was like, and I walked down that campus, there wasn't a single blade of grass. It looked like a prison inside and out. And I said, first of all, if any student there, what are you telling them when they walk in that room? And is this really making them any more safe? And that was, especially in the beginning when all those rules came out, because I also was involved with a school in Florida. We had a completely open campus on a nature preserve.
Yeah.
And we did a security assessment. And one of the interesting things that they found was, they said, well, the great thing about this is that you have every direction the kids can run in. So they don't just run into one room and whatever, that they can just go, because it was, and so that was, I think, people try so hard, right? Because they're so traumatized, but they're maybe not asking the right people, right? Maybe and so that's you want to keep them safe, but does that really? And then is safety only that physical safety? What about their mental and their spiritual, their emotional and their educational?
And as Jennifer and you can attest to, and I shared with this group before, we're doing active shooter drills once a month. We're mandated to do active shooter drills. Now, we don't call that over the loudspeaker. We just call it a code red, shelter in place. But once a month, besides the fire drills we are mandated to do, we have to do these active shooter drills. It's a whole new world.
We were talking about the Florida perspective on this, but how is it in the other states? Do you have the same similar reactions or rules, regulations, things that happen?
We do not in Massachusetts have the same rules as having a security guard, an armed police officer in the buildings. We do not have that. We are required to have an updated emergency preparedness plan. There's no requirement to practice on a regular basis. Why I am pausing is because I have really mixed feelings about this. So I'm glad in a way to hear you and Jennifer both say the requirement is the same, because what you typically see in underserved populations, those are the ones that have the metal detectors, the armed officers, and kids. You're making assumptions about kids before they walk through the door. Right. So I'm glad to hear they do it in every single school, in the wealthy, white, affluent Palm Springs, whatever that school is, and wherever that is. If that's required, okay, Florida, do you?
Right.
And they do. And they do. We see it all on the media. But I will say that the part of restorative practices, in my view, is humanizing, when possible, our police officer, because people look like me are police officers. Fast forward, what does that look like in terms of community engagement? Me working with the mayor, working with the DA, working with the commissioner of the police department. How can we demystify this notion that police are bad? Because we have to look at the experience of our children, my children, see Black and brown people shot on a regular basis. It's all splashed across the media. They also see it in their communities. So for me to say I'm going to bring in an armed officer into the school, their safe place, their haven, that's not safe. So I am working on, let's come in plain clothes. I'm calling the shots. You can come in plain clothes. Build relationship with our kids. Let's talk about how do we keep the streets safe? Let's talk about safety on social media. Let's not just focus on weapons. What are other things that kids and parents need to know? So we've had that workshop with our kids. We're having similar workshops with our families. Our families were so intrigued and wanted to know more about social media and all the crimes and how a lot of this stuff initiates, that no matter what relationships we all have with our kids and how great we are, you can't see that stuff. And so we're now trying to think about how can we better access that information.
So we know that the reason why people do things, right, needs to be addressed. It's not just what tool they use to execute that. So, but your school, right, you guys are in a neighborhood that people would expect to have all of the bells and whistles and things, but you don't. So tell us about that.
Well, one of the things I think I've taken a different approach, that if you put metal detectors and you put guards and you put all these things, you have already delved into the students' minds that they are criminals, and that you've already perpetuated that idea. So if you take down those guards and you greet them with smiles and hugs and care, then now you humanize them and you made them understand that this is a safe place. And so when kids feel safe, we're not raising criminals, we're raising scholars. And if you create an environment where that is the case, then 9 times out of 10 you're going to have that type of behavior. And so for the past 12 years, as we're the only high school in the District of Columbia that does not have metal detectors. We do not have armed guards.
Yes.
We do not have security walking around the building all over the place. We have adults in place to monitor and to support. And then we also went to a different functionality where we have a camera system, because it's not just not for the kids, it's actually protection of adults and watching what's going on around. We believe that is a more effective way. Kids also feel safe because they'll say, "Can you roll the camera back? I think I lost my keys." You know,
Look on the camera, you'll see.
it's one of those things that understand. So everybody has a concept. They know that the camera is not about spying, but more of a safety mechanism, and that I can feel safe to come in the building without someone patting me down, without having to change my style by having a clear book bag and somebody's going through my belongings. Just let's face it, we all feel a certain way when you go to the airport. And I know traveling last week, my TSA pre was not on there, and I was very irritated that I had to take my shoes off. And so it was just one of those things. So imagine coming in a building every day and being and you know, interrogated like that, and then expect me to learn the rest of the day. So with that, I think it comes to the greeting, because we have to understand kids come with their best and they want to come. That's the reason they're there. And if you treat them that way, then you're going to get the best out of them. Since we've been open for the past 12 years, I've had one expulsion, just one. And that expulsion was forced in a way because of the perpetuation of a negligent parent, I should say, that sort of pushed over where the student felt that they needed to defend the parent in a certain way, and it wind up working in the opposite way that it should have. However, the environment itself is what happens at the door. You start with a great custodian, so we walk to a clean building. There's no graffiti, there's no writing, but everything positive, you're going to get a positive response.
The school as a center, not only for the children, but for your community. Like that is also an anchor. So when Jennifer, you talked a little bit before about your groundbreaking, but your community, I mean, I think there was like 6 pastors there. I think they're like, so can you talk about, and the neighbors, and I'd like you to share a little bit more about that again, their ownership in a school that their children don't even go to.
Yes. So our groundbreaking that happened about a month ago, we had like 70 RSVPs, and we probably had about 130 people show up. And some people showed up because they were like, "Hey, I heard from so-and-so that you guys were doing the groundbreaking." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry I didn't say it the last time we were at the neighborhood association meeting." So it was really this, just a melting pot of everybody who was in our community. They were there, you know, from our elected officials to just some grandmothers in the community, some retired teachers, some people who really give locally and they give, you know, they're philanthropists, they were there. Just everyone, our corporate partners. And then what ended up happening was that morning when we were setting up, there was a woman who was looking kind of over the fence, and she was like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Oh, we're building, you know, our school right here." She's like, "Oh, a school." And I said, "Yes." And so she spoke little English, and so I saw one of my scholars, and I was like, "Come here, come here. Do you speak Creole?" So she spoke Creole back and forth, and she ended up coming over to the groundbreaking. And then there were people who were, you know, standing at the fence, and they were looking over and, you know, cheering us on too. So it felt really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's really, like, community, we often, just like all the other topics that we've been discussing, it's like, how do you define that, right? What does that mean? And when we were, it reminded me of a story when we were building the campus in Ocoee, Florida, and we had a nature preserve type, and also they might call it a swamp, but I called it a nature preserve. I'm part of it. Thank you. So it's all in how you spin it, right? No, but it was a beautiful 18-acre piece with tons and tons of trees. And that was a very important piece to me personally to save them. But I was there and I lived nearby, so I would come and check on it literally every single day because it was my baby. I wanted to see what they were doing. I also, because the one day I didn't go and they did cut down a lot of trees, And I was like, I'm sorry, you could have used the little one instead of the big one to clear the path. I don't think I said it that nicely, but there was this man who comes on, I see this like ATV and those little four-wheeler things, and this is like a country part. It's Orlando, but it's relatively rural. I mean, it's changing, becoming more suburban. And I hear, and I was doing something over here. And I look, and he's there, and he's got a kid right here, completely unsafe, no helmet, no nothing, but they're just bouncing around. And I was like, oh my God. And I was just like, oh, hi. And he's like, you know what they're doing here? And I'm like, building a school. He's like, they're going to cut down all these trees. He goes, I just know it. He's just like, that's all they do. These developers, they come in, they do that. And I was like, oh no, we're not going to. And he said, what? And I was like, no, I'm with the school. We're here to save this. And then I just got engaged in a conversation with him. He said he was a Boy Scout and he used to camp on that property. And his little girl that he had there, the sound of the ATV always calmed her, right? And I'm like, you still could wear a helmet, but anyways, so like, go with a helmet, dude. But it was, and he was a rough dude. A little tear came out of his eye when I told him that. He's like, you're gonna save the trees? I'm like, oh yeah. That's great. Right? I mean, I saved them all. We saved a lot. Right? And to me, and I went, wow, the power of just that to that man and his community, right? It was so great. And so it's sometimes it's stuff we don't even realize, right? We're focused on, I got to build this, I got to do this, and we're going to go, wait a minute, that made a difference. And he's like, well, can I tell the neighbors? I'm like, please do, because we've got a meeting coming up where they don't know. But he did, and he shared it with the neighbors, and we actually brought all the neighbors cookies. To thanks. I'm sorry, there's construction, here's some cookies. I'm sorry, there's construction, here's some cookies. But anyways, that was just a little aside there. But on our community engagement piece too, so I want to hear some other things that you guys are doing. Sharing about how that you're bringing the community in or how you're pushing it out into the community, different ways that we could share with other folks, or even how to get started. Because a lot of you have been at this for a while. So, yeah.
I'll share. Changing just a bit about how we are bringing the community into the school as a result of us just not having enough time to do all the things we want to do. And because I am a STEMist and I have a great appreciation for STEM, we couldn't fit it in. We do what is required, but we needed to do more. And so we started what we call a STEAM Saturday Academy. So 3 times a year, 4 to 6 times a week, in 4 to 6 consecutive weeks, we bring in our community partners to offer STEAM classes for our students. We bring in the Museum of Science, where you bring in bio builders. We might bring in a karate academy. We bring in Somerville Groundworks, which is a local partner to teach our kids about gardening and farm to table. So we offer 10 to 12 STEAM courses every week, 4 to 6 consecutive weeks. And when we first launched it, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was really worried about it. I knew the motto was effective because I had seen it in other places. So I think that's something important for us to know. Everything doesn't have to be an original idea. Right. And I'm a firm believer in what's good enough for those suburban kids is even better for my kids. So, so that's one reason why I brought it. And I was so struck by families from 50 different communities, really far, coming on Saturday to bring their children. And that speaks to the power of providing access and opportunity to things that our kids normally, wouldn't have. They wouldn't have a ballet class or a dance class, and you're bringing. And the flip side of that is, Facebook and Google, they're coming in, and in my mind is your organization is in our community. Our children are here. You should be interested in building a pipeline right there. So as a result of some of that, we have, we host a hackathon at Facebook. They host us. The Google and Facebook, they mentor our children to help them design apps and programs that solve social issues. And so that's something we do annually now. And as a result of how can we do more outside of the school day, and we just tapped into our community partners to support that work.
How are you preserving the culture and traditions of the community that you serve?
Well, so, our school arose out of Asian American activism around public education, right? And so because of that, we had, communities engaged in having to fight for our school. At first, I was kind of naively thinking it was kind of a technocratic exercise. We get the best proposal together, put it to the school board. No, it was like we had to mobilize protesters and school buses and petitions and meetings. So, from the start, there was this level of community engagement in getting the school. Like we had 30 Chinatown organizations writing letters of support. We had school buses going to the school board meetings. And so although that was irritating that they didn't just accept that this was a wonderful proposal, on the other hand, it got, people actively engaged in supporting it. Part of this thinking about activism and institution building is like this Asian American community organization that I was part of that founded our school, has this approach of, so we stand up against injustice, but we also have to build the positive part of it. And so, one aspect of our participation in community stuff is participating in this Chinatown Mid-Autumn Festival, which is one day a year when this community group takes over the main street of Chinatown. And it's like, this is not here for tourists. This is a community. People live, work, worship, play here. And so, that's really super powerful. But that festival was initiated, over 25 years ago by middle school youth. And now it's primarily powered by high school youth. And then our school participates, like our teacher choir sings there, and different of our folk arts ensembles will perform there. Our Vietnamese other people will perform, and our Kung Fu students. And so, recognizing the relationship between the community building part, which forms around, we're not going to be ashamed of being Chinese or being Asian. We're going to be proud of it and own it. I mean, that's been a journey of, 25 years, right? It went from Mid-Autumn Festival being not really known as a thing to becoming this super beloved community tradition. But what we found is that, that festival, which seems, sometimes people kind of ridicule like festivals as being fringy or like, decoration, like surfacey.
Yep.
But part of it is, it helped people see that there's something here to fight for.
Right.
So Chinatown has been beset by, they put a convention center there, they put a freeway through, and then we have been involved in fighting off a professional baseball stadium, casinos twice, a federal prison, and so when you build community and when you build institutions, whether it's a festival or something else, part of it's like giving people something to fight for, right? That we do not accept the definition that Chinatown is here for being on your postcard and for your tourist buses. We're here to be a community. We're here to stay, and we're gonna fight for ourselves.
That's awesome. About just community engagement and thinking about activism. And you were talking about middle schoolers, like going to City Hall, or middle schoolers starting that celebration. Just thinking about giving students the tools, because the young people, as Sky Ali said, they're the ones that are going to actually make the change. When you look historically, it's always the youth that have, propelled a movement. Even we were talking about it last night about Dr. Martin Luther King and how actually young he was. It's always been the youth that actually that mobilize, and really create the energy to create a change. And so giving students the power, the tools that they need to have a voice. And actually, when you think of community, the thing to me is that, we all are doing our part, in our communities, everywhere. But the broader picture, the overarching thing is that as a nation, there needs to be a paradigm shift. There needs to be that mind shift, the shift in thinking about education. Really, even as much as we do this work, why do we have to fight so hard to do the work? You know, why do we have to fight so hard for things that are positive, that things that do make a change, that actually are like they're compelling and you can see it in the data. But why do we constantly have to fight this, you know, instead of, you know, and so this is why I think about like youth, because there needs to be a change of the guard, like in politics, in you know, in really creating a culture shift, a mind shift, like as a nation, to make education really first, to make children matter, education matters, and that representation matters. And to me, like for as much as we do, that's why communities have to like engage. That's why we have to like, we can't do it alone. We rely on our communities to like our partners, everyone in the community to do a part. And so, I mean, and to like bring up our kids. But I really, I hope that like, you know, we can like make sure our kids do have a voice so they can actually be the ones to speak to these politicians, to like make policy change, because it's what's happening now, it's just not enough and we seem to be going backwards.
So I feel like what you're talking about is like this deep sense of purpose and, you know, purpose to make big change. And then, you know, you're also talking about like, what is the legislative change? What is the big change? But it made me think a lot about like, what is the change that we can make within our individual communities as well? So an example that popped into my mind is it was probably year 3 or year 4 the launch was open. Our students and families and staff came to us and they were like, our habits of heart and mind, the values that guide us, that we were founded on, like they're not right anymore. Like our school has shifted and we came up with these values before we opened and they're not quite right. And so, you know, based on that kind of initiation of the conversation, we brought together students and parents and staff members and alumni and community leaders to come together and to say, what are our values? And how do we make sure that our habits that we live by every single day are the habits that really lift up our community? And we came up with a new set of habits and we defined them together and we really made a commitment to live by them, not just as students, but like in staff reflection conversations, we use our habits as well. And then just at the end of this year, we've been talking a lot about Ubuntu at our school this year and, you know, equity and ensuring that our curriculum is culturally relative. And I feel like there's a lot of new ideas that we've brought in. And again, students and teachers and staff came and said like Ubuntu should be reflected in our values. You know, we see pieces of it here and we see pieces of it here, but now we're in the process of potentially making that shift again to continue to evolve. And I think it's not just about the big change and the legislative change, but it's also about making sure that all of the different constituent groups have voice at the school level and that we're able to sort of be vulnerable and to evolve with the times to change from within.
So I think, and I love that you were talking about the one thing that you can do that has a ripple effect, right? Like our little ripples that you're seeing everywhere, it wasn't new, but I still felt it's so important because sometimes we don't feel like the one thing we can do is enough, right? I remember someone asked me, why do you recycle if you also take an airplane somewhere? I was like, what? They're like, do you know how much gas the airplanes? I was like, so I gotta walk to Miami? I'm like, I was like, but I stand out. We shouldn't try to save the trees on the other, or the plastic on the other side. I was like, no, because every little thing has that ripple effect. And like, you do what you can, when you can, with what you got, right? And so I wanted to reflect. So this community discussion, and just like all of our other discussions, like great schools do it all, and there are these beautiful places, and but you have to also be all those things. You have to be innovative. You have to empower your students. You have to engage your community to succeed. And I think that's true for every school. But charter schools, in the good ways, like we look at the positive part of this, we have a beautiful ability to be able to pivot. Right? We got less money, we got lots of fighting to do and a lot of arguing to do with politicians, but we can pivot and we can develop and we can empower each other to do more, right? And soon, and like charter schools have been around for a really long time and we're still having to have the same conversations over, no, there's no tuition, no, we're not stealing your children, no, and that is not something that's acceptable any longer. And I think to your point, it's like there are times in our culture, and it's usually driven by the youth, that it's just not okay anymore. So I feel like, you know, and I'm very passionate about this, as you guys know, but again, tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about this as well, because it's time, and here we are, and we can make the change. And if we do it with the students, with the children, with the communities, then it's just not like one person, right? It's not one school. It is, because actually, and it was supposed to be our country, we the people, right? And then I'm like, but wait, every time I talk to people, we all agree. So how are we so far afield from what we all in this room just, it is very clear. You guys are such a cross-section of the United States, and, all these different kinds of schools and all these different places. I mean, right Chinatown and in the middle of the woods, right? You guys, but we have so much of agreement and common purpose, and it's just amazing to me that, and this didn't happen by accident or by total randomness, but it's time. And y'all saw something in that application or in that, initial, however we reach out to you, to say, okay, I'm ready. I know it's not the $1 million grant, but I'm gonna go, I got something to say. So I really feel like for us, we now have this community, right? The impact community has begun. And this is not the end. This is the single pebble right now. And then those ripples are gonna go for as long as we choose. And the more pebbles we put in there and the more people we invite to these conversations, the bigger it's gonna be. So thank you very much for joining us in all of these conversations for the Building Hope Summit Impact Awards. We have been blessed, and we have been so honored to have all of these amazing leaders present and so willing to share their special sauce, the things that make their schools so great, the things that empower students, that engage the community, and that innovate education every single day. These folks are walking the walk. And so I'm hoping that everyone got to learn a little bit for this and to understand that this is only the beginning. Thank you very much.